Welcome to another edition of Pop Stories by Fred Dietz. This is another one of my own creations. This is called Saor, the Free Colony of Wild Hamsters. Only one time a year is it the time to make your way to the legendary lost city of the hamsters, Saor. One must be brave. One must be fearless. One must have the ability to see. One must bring your heart. Pip-Pip lived in a large rectangular cage. There were many places to visit in his cage. He had different levels to climb up and over. There were brightly colored little houses where he made little rooms for himself. No matter where he went in his large rectangular cage, he could see the outside world. He wanted to explore the world outside of his cage. One day, after spending what seemed like an eternity to a little hamster like Pip-Pip, of climbing up and down, over and over, side to side, he found a little opening. He wiggled his nose out. He sniffed. He sniffed again. He did it 3 more times. It was different, he said to himself. The air outside felt different from the air inside his cage. Finally, he started to squeeze and push and squeeze and push and squeeze and push, and then pop! He was outside of the large rectangular cage with all the shelves meant for climbing and the little houses meant for sleeping and keeping his toys. After having escaped his large rectangular cage many times, after having many adventures by himself or with Zoe, Butters, and Pierre, after visiting the whole house, even the secret places his humans had made, many, many times, Pip-Pip found himself looking out the window. "I thought I might find you here," said Zoe. "I see the stars and the bit of moon in the night sky," replied Pip-Pip, forlornly as he pointed out the window without turning round. "But I do not feel the moonlight. I do not feel the night wind." He paused as if in mid-thought. He turned to look at his friend. "I have not had the chance to run on the grass, over the hills, or through a stream while racing you." He paused as he looked back at the night sky. He spun back around. "I have not had a chance to sing and dance with you beneath the stars." He paused again. He held up his arms. "Why? We have never had a chance to pop corn over an open fire while telling stories." "I know," replied Zoe. "I want to sing under the warm sun, under a sun shower. I want to slide down a hill in the snow while racing you. But it means going outside," they both said at the same time. Both started pacing back and forth on the windowsill. "It means," started Zoe. "Yes, it does," replied Pip-Pip. "What about," started Pip-Pip. "Of course we will," responded Zoe. "Of course you will what?" asked Butters and Pierre. "We are both going into the wild," replied Zoe and Pip-Pip. Butters and Pierre looked at each other. "It's going to be dangerous out there," said Pierre. "Quite," replied Zoe. "What about our human?" asked Butters. "She will miss both of you." "And we will miss her," replied Pip-Pip. "But this is our next great adventure." "Where will you go?" asked Pierre. "I am not certain," responded Zoe. "I am," responded Pip-Pip as he looked down. "Saor." "Saor?" said Zoe, Butters, and Pierre. "Saor, the free colony of wild hamsters." Pip-Pip stopped for a moment. He moved to the window. He pointed up. "Once a year," began Pip-Pip, "the hamster star is in alignment with Saor." The other 3 said, "Where?" Pip-Pip held up his hands as he asked for a moment. "Some time ago I came across secret writings that had been hidden in a crack at the foot of my human's bed. I found them quite by accident as I had tripped over the crack. As I rubbed my sore foot, I looked into the crack. It was then that I found a diary. It appeared to be very old. It was the only hamster in the house. I knew it was not something I had written or seen before. I read the diary several times." He paused for a moment. "All we have to do is follow the markings to reach it." Pierre and Butters looked at each other. Pip-Pip and Zoe nodded their heads. "We know. You two are not ready to leave here," spoke Zoe. "I'm not able to see that day." Here Zoe stopped for a moment. "It will happen one day." Pip-Pip joined in. "We will leave markers for you to find us when that day does happen. Then we will all be together again." The 4 friends held each other as Pip-Pip and Zoe prepared for the trip. They packed light, as there was no telling what the two would encounter on their trip. Soon the 4 were at the departure point. "This is where we will part ways for now," spoke Zoe. "We will not say goodbye. Rather, it will be when we see you again, said Pierre. Pierre and Butters watched from the windowsill until Pip-Pip and Zoe disappeared. After that, they went to the kitchen before heading back to their homes. By the way, if you hear a cat, or if you happen to see a cat that might pop through here in a moment, that is my youngest daughter, Emma Grace's cat, Snowball, that has seemed to have adopted my work area. Pip-Pip led the way as he kept looking up into the stars. After an hour, the two stopped for a rest. We have about another 2 hours of night before we will need to rest, said Pip-Pip. Pip-Pip helped Zoe to her feet. With that, the two continued on their journey. It did not take too long for those 2 hours to pass. Pip-Pip and Zoe scouted for a place to sleep. They looked around at several places before Zoe spotted the perfect place. The two looked at a tree. They had climbed many things before. Dressers, cabinets, counters. Neither had ever climbed a tree. Zoe looked at it. She smiled and ran up to the trunk to the first set of branches. Well? I'll be right there, replied Pip-Pip. But he wasn't. On his first try, he fell back to the ground. After his fifth try, Pip-Pip found himself still on the ground. He backed up. Then he backed up some more. Then he took off as fast as he could straight at the tree. Right on up he went until he ran out of energy. He started to fall back to the ground. Fortunately, Zoe reached out in time to catch him. She pulled him up to the branch. Well, not quite as expected, said Pip-Pip as he adjusted his backpack. But here we are. Both looked to see how far they could see, for it was higher than they had ever been. They looked up. They looked at each other. They smiled at each other. Up they went. Round and round the tree the two went until they reached the top branches. Soon, for all who cared to look, they would have seen Zoe and Pip-Pip sitting in the top branches of the tree, further up than they had ever been from the ground. The view was spectacular. After a few moments, the need for sleep took over. They climbed down a bit to find a good spot to sleep. They found a crook in the tree where the leaves had gathered. It was not long until both were sound asleep. Pip-Pip started to stretch as he woke. He became aware that others were watching him. He awoke to find 7 squirrels, a handful of birds, and 3 chipmunks staring at him. He nudged Zoe to wake up. Zoe rolled over. 5 more minutes, please, she mumbled. Zoe, we have company, replied Pip-Pip. Tell them to come back later, honey. I'm still tired, said Zoe in a very sleepy voice. Yeah, I don't think that is an option, replied Pip-Pip. A chorus of voices echoed Pip-Pip's statement. He startled Zoe and immediately sat up. We really are not alone, she said. Nope, we are not, honey, replied Pip-Pip. Zoe had a burst of nervous laughter. Hello, everyone. How are you? She started to brush her hair. I must look a mess. No, not at all, replied Pip-Pip. I take it sleeping outside agreed with you. Zoe laughed. Yes, but a little more would not have hurt. Her stomach rumbled. I guess what we need to find next is some food. At that comment, several left. They returned shortly with nuts, seeds, and fruit. Pip-Pip and Zoe thanked each for the food. They both were quite hungry. They thanked their hosts again and again. After both had eaten, several started to ask questions. One squirrel asked Zoe, Are you some kind of weird squirrel relative? Zoe shook her head. No, I am a chinchilla. One of the chipmunks asked the same question to Pip-Pip. You look like one of us. A little. Pip-Pip shook his head no. Well, I am flattered. I am a hamster, he bowed as he spoke. One bird started to whisper to another one. The whispering finally found a voice in one of the squirrels. Are you headed to Saor? Pip-Pip nodded his head. Yes. Then it is fortunate you stopped here, said a cardinal. The bridge is underwater. I saw it 3 days ago myself. A look of concern crossed Pip-Pip's face. How far is it before we reach Saor? By wing, it is a full 2 days of flight. But seeing that you have no wings, it will take you 4 days of walking, said the cardinal. Perhaps the river has gone down, Zoe said as she looked at her friend. Pip-Pip smiled. You are always the hopeful one. Pip-Pip looked for a moment. Maybe it is a gift in disguise. We will have a chance to explore before reaching Saor. Those gathered thought it was a good idea. Several places were mentioned as must-see things to do or to see. Zoe and Pip-Pip filled their backpacks with some of the food before leaving. The two climbed down the tree. They waved as they walked away. The two had many adventures on the road. There is no need to tell of all that happened on that road, but some selected highlights are good to know. Since it had rained not that long ago, there were numerous mud puddles that invited the two to splash each other on the trip. There was the night, the moon, and all about was shrouded in thick fog. That night the two found a tree with a lot of leaves to cover them to keep warm. There was the discovery of bush after bush of blueberries. On the night of the 7th day, after leaving home, they climbed a tree to find a sleeping place. They had become used to climbing and sleeping in trees. Pip-Pip climbed to the top of the tree. He held onto the top of the top branch. The wind made the branch sway a bit. He held on through it all. His eyes narrowed as he tried to look as far away as possible. He climbed down a few branches to where Zoe had made camp. "Well," said Zoe, "did you see it? Did you see the river?" She turned to look at her friend. Pip-Pip was silent for a moment. Pip-Pip nodded his head yes as he started to smile. "It is not that far." He pointed in the general direction of the river. "What if we get there and they do not let me in for not being a hamster?" asked Zoe. "Then we will know the way home and all of the good places to stop. Where to have traveled to the moon and back. I would not leave my best friend," replied Pip-Pip as he lay down in the leafy bed. The morning found the two doing their usual preparation for the day's travel, only this time they hoped to reach Saor. It was mid-morning when the two found the river. They followed the shore up to the bridge. They looked at each other. After looking across the river, they both put their hands on each other as they stepped onto the bridge. Both took a deep sigh. "Always together," said Pip-Pip. "In all kinds of weather," said Zoe. They started forward, step by step. They went together across that bridge. They took a big sigh as they reached the other shore. "May I wonder what brings you to this side of the river?" came a voice from a little bit away. The voice was hidden by a bit of branches. "We are travelers looking for Saor," said Pip-Pip. A figure came out from behind the branches. He looked at the two. "It's plain to see you are a hamster. But what of your friend?" "She does not look like any hamster I have ever seen," said the now seeable hamster. "I am a chinchilla," replied Zoe. "I see," said the hamster. "Well, by our rules, you are welcome here," said a new voice. The other hamster was startled at the appearance of the newest hamster. He bowed as the new hamster approached. "I did not hear your approach." The new hamster smiled. "You must forgive Nose. He is following the literal rules of Saor, being only for hamsters, but we have not always been that way, and it seems we should not be that way now," spoke the newcomer. "Excuse me, Chief Gregory. I was not following the rules that had been written down from long ago." "I was following the rules that had been written down from long ago," he replied Nose. "However, I will follow your words. I bid both of you welcome to Saor." With that, he held out his hand in friendship. Pip-Pip and Zoe shook his hand. Chief Gregory walked in front of Pip-Pip and Zoe as he led them toward Saor. As they walked, Chief Gregory pointed out several landmarks. Finally, the road opened to reveal the city. As they stood looking at the city, they could see many buildings, parks, and a forest beyond. "As you see," Chief Gregory noted, "we have created quite a society, considering we are pets that have escaped." Here he paused as he smiled. While he looked at the city, he started again. "We have built factories to make the items we need, like clothing. We have farms and orchards for food." He stopped for a moment as he pointed to the harbor. "We even have a fleet of sailing ships for fishing and exploration." He pointed to a group of ships. "We even have a navy. Some hamsters serve in our guard to make certain Saor is safe, protected." Chief Gregory looked at Pip-Pip and Zoe. "I am certain both of you will fit into our society and make us even stronger. Don't you think so, Captain Nose?" Pip-Pip and Zoe had not heard the other hamster approach. "I believe they will, and as always, I will follow your decisions," Captain Nose responded. "Well then," replied Chief Gregory, "please lead our two new citizens to the welcoming center." With that, he turned and walked away. "Please follow me," said Captain Nose as he led the two towards the city. "Before we go any further, the name came from my human who held our noses together. It is easier to explain it now than to have you keep wondering or whispering about it as we walked to our destination." The three walked down the hill toward Saor. Pip-Pip figured it looked about 10 minutes for the walk from where they were to the edge of the city. As they walked, Captain Nose told them about this place and that. More than one hamster took a long look at Zoe. Finally, they arrived at a series of buildings. "This is our welcome center for those newly escaped pets," said Captain Nose as he led the two into the building. "I will turn you over to their capable hands. I wish you both good luck and hope all that goes well in your transition from being a pet." With that, he bowed and departed. Several older hamsters came over to the two. They looked at the two of them. They looked at each other. The first one said, "This is most unusual to have a squirrel." "Chinchilla," corrected Zoe. "Is that so?" "Oh, that is even rarer," she replied, seemingly non-deterred by Zoe's comment. She nodded her head. "Well, that is quite unique, as you are our first chinchilla to come through here. Isn't that so?" she said to the other hamster. The other hamster nodded her head. "Yes." "Well, you two came at just the right time. It is lunch. Please come this way, as we have several other new arrivals." She led them to a large hall. Several other newcomers were seated nearby. Pip-Pip and Zoe could hear one talking to another. The other newcomer started, "If anyone mentions wheel, I will really lose it. I couldn't take the wheel anymore. Couldn't my human hear that the wheel needed oil? No, all my human did was jump up and down while holding a controller to his picture box. Then he would throw down the thing as he was holding. Then he would throw himself on his bed. As a side note, I turned his bed into a litter box before escaping." He paused for a second as he started to laugh. He began again. "And the food. Mind you, I don't hate seeds, but really, that is the only thing it could give me. No fruit, nothing else but seeds. And the water was always stale." At that point, someone put down a plate of seeds in front of him. He simply looked at the serving hamster. Zoe and Pip-Pip looked at the other hamster as they shrugged their shoulders in sympathy. The two looked back at their own table. "The open road is looking pretty darn good right now," they both said at the same time. They started to laugh. Chief Gregory stopped by the table. "I am sorry to interrupt your lunch. Tonight we will do a special ceremony. I would like you two there as my special guest." "We would be honored," replied Pip-Pip. "Excellent," replied Chief Gregory. "I am certain Miss Hoppy and Miss Lightning will give you directions. Until that time, use the remainder of the day to wander about Saor." With that, he departed. The two bade goodbye to Chief Gregory. They quietly finished their meal. After that, they thanked Miss Hoppy and Miss Lightning. "Come on," said Pip-Pip to Zoe. "Let us go on another adventure." With that, the two bounded out the door. It would be impossible to see everything in Saor in one day. It would also be impossible to recount everything the two saw or thought during the same period. We shall simply note that the two went to the farthest parts of Saor, and they had seen from the hilltop. Suffice it to say, the two enjoyed themselves. As evening approached, Zoe and Pip-Pip had no need to return to the welcoming center to see Miss Hoppy or Miss Lightning for directions. They didn't have to ask anyone else for directions. The fireworks told all to come to the evening's festivities. "Welcome to all. It is good to see all of Hellstrom's night." Chief Gregory's voice rang strong for all to hear. "There was a time when men and hamsters lived as equals, when men worked with hamsters rather than encaged us as pets. On Hellstrom's night, we remind ourselves with the retelling of old stories, with the hope of new tomorrow. In the days of old, the wild hamster leaders used to spy for Vikings and Gaelic chiefs. That chief amongst the legends is the legend of Hellstrom, the ambassador of Mimar. Mimar had trained Hellstrom, all wise and knowing of old. His knowledge was passed to his descendants, and only those wise among men would be able to understand his words. Many great deeds were accomplished by this friendship. Many great battles were won. Many hardships were overcome by the alliance. Over time, men forgot how to listen to our speech. We were forgotten. Worse, we became curiosities, relegated to the status of pets." Chief Gregory paused for a moment. When he paused, many in the crowd booed. Chief Gregory held up his hand for silence. He began again. "For many generations, we suffered through the humility of being a pet. Then one night, Echtrecia heard a voice. He followed the voice to the edge of the tent. He went out of the tent. He looked up. He saw it. The brightest star in the sky was Hellstrom's star. Echtrecia had spent many a night studying the sky. Echtrecia knew Hellstrom's star was only the brightest star one night per year. Living up to her name, he followed where the star sent its light that night. He ran the length of the night. Just as the sun started to look over the edge of the world, he found the last light of Hellstrom's star touching the earth. Though it was on the other side of a river, he was not to be deterred. He dove into the water. While it was cold, it did not stop him. Cold, shivering, he pulled himself out of the river. He collapsed on the bank of the river, on the far shore. Somehow, he picked himself up to walk up the hill, the very hill many of you yourself have climbed. Then he saw it. the beautiful plain below. He uttered one word, Saor. From the start, word spread of the new place for those that no longer wanted to be pets or curiosities. At its founding, any that sought to live simply, freely, found their way to Saor. With Extraterria, what Extraterria started, oh so long ago, we have continued. As he paused, many shouted Saor several times. Tonight, hear his voice grow even stronger. We have newcomers to reaffirm Extraterria's view. All should be welcomed. All who seek to live simply, freely. Chief Gervier paused again. He looked at Pip-Pip and Zoe. I said Pip-Pip and Zoe stand. This young couple symbolized all that our history stands for at its very best. I ask all to bid them and all other newcomers welcome. Be at peace. Know that Saor is your new home. Many stood to cheer. Several fireworks filled the sky. While Pip-Pip and Zoe looked at the sight, an old hamster walked up to them. He wore very thick glasses. I am Spinner, he said in an old voice as he bowed low. I ask you follow me without asking the why. Both looked at each other. A smile was in each of their eyes. We will see what you want to show us, said Zoe. Zoe and Pip-Pip followed Spinner. It was not a long walk. He took them to a house that overlooked a small pond. The view of the sky was not encumbered. There were flowers around the house. Spinner led the two inside his home. Once inside, Pip-Pip and Zoe looked about in amazement. The two slowly stood in the center of the main room. It seemed that all space was used, but nothing covered anything else. I brought you here to see into the two of you, said Spinner as he sat down at a desk. The two looked at each other with a puzzled look. Spinner began again. There have always been those amongst us that see. Here he held up a piece of old wood. It caught the moonlight for Pip-Pip to see. At first Pip-Pip stared at it. Why are you... Then he saw it. There was writing. Pip-Pip stared in amazement. He started to read it. Spinner quickly put it down. It does not matter what it says, only that you are able to read it, said Spinner hastily. Spinner stood up. If you would please accompany me outside. He led them to the pond. Once more Spinner held up an old piece of wood. Once more Pip-Pip stared at it in frustration until he saw the message. It is clear there's something special about you. Even your friend knows that. Spinner paused again. There's a legend of old that few are able to read. It speaks of you and you. Spinner pointed at Pip-Pip and Zoe. What does it say? Asked Pip-Pip. I do not know, Spinner said as he shook his head. It is meant for you to read. Spinner looked up at the night coming onto the pond. We must be quick. Here he led them back into the house, back into the room. Quickly, Spinner picked up another piece of old wood. We must hurry. We have to reach where one sees all. Spinner led them back through Saor, back past the celebration, back to the spot where they stood, overlooking the city. Spinner handed the old piece of wood to Pip-Pip. It took a few moments. Pip-Pip started to read the writing in the light of the moon and the stars. He was silent after reading it. Pip-Pip began to read what he saw. This was written on such a night. It tells of how two built a house, of one being a hamster and one from a far land high in the mountains. While the first was a hamster, the second was a chinchilla. Since that time, no other chinchilla has been here. Zoe looked at Pip-Pip. Spinner looked at the two. We will have a house built by mine, so we are able to read and teach, while we would be honored. I would prefer another spot, said Pip-Pip. Spinner nodded his head. I know of a place. It is outside Saor. Pip-Pip smiled. Pip-Pip turned to Zoe. Will you come with me into the wild? It will not be easy. We will need to be brave. The road will hold peril. We must be fearless. We must look into the eyes of the world that may not be kind. We must look with our eyes and heart to see what is there. And, wherever we go, I will have my heart with me, for you will be there. Again, I will ask you to come with me. Let's build a house in a different part of this wide world. We will share our adventures. Each day will bring us some new place to explore, or we shall learn more of where we are. Zoe looked at him. Always together, in all kinds of weather. I would follow you to the moon and back, and never stop wanting for the adventure to stop, as long as we are able to share that adventure together. It is said that Pip-Pip and Zoe left Saor by ways unknown, except revealed to those that are able to read special writing from old. They wander the road for several days, maybe weeks, depending on how the story is told. It is said they found a small glade with just enough berries, a small stream, and a view of the stars. It is whispered that their house is stained purple by berries. There are fairy lights. The lights open and close to one after the other. It is noted there is room for one more house. There is more to the story. Those two chose a spot, a place to be away from all. They chose a place where they needed to be brave, where they needed to be fearless, where one needs to bring one's heart. It is told that the two received guests from many lands. It is whispered that many strange folk would stop to talk to the two, long into the night. It is also whispered that Pip-Pip left a writing that can only be read once a year. Some note that Zoe had a way to write that rivaled Pip-Pip's. But that is another story to be told on another night. Only one time a year is it the time to make your way to the legendary lost city of hamsters, Saor. One must be brave. One must be fearless. One must have the ability to see. One must bring your heart.